They took the umlaut out of my family name. One day, 150 years ago, in a castle garden where Jenny Lind once sang and Lola Montez once danced, as my father's ancestors filed through the sandstoned old fort in high collars and mustaches, bonnets and bright eyes, to a newer world, excised by officials, who officiously removed that front-rounded vowel and added an E for ease, because it was easier for American speakers and typewriters to master. At least they left the patronymic fairly Germanic on the page, and in some learned ears, à la Goethe. But so long for good do the signature strikes, the signaling strokes, Morse code-like dots floating over the old familial letters, this line of emigrating Goedeckes was willing to live without, to say Auf Wiedersehen to their, our beloved umlaut. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in to show 131 in my ongoing weekly series, coming to you live from the heirloom coast of Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more fully, more alively, more poetically. In broadcast 130, we contemplated aging and youthing, the arc of living, of life journeying, the seasons, harvests, joys and challenges of being alive and uniquely here on earth, on aging vitally, gracefully, and gratefully, on preserving and nourishing an eternally youthful spirit, imagination, curiosity, and making meaningful imprints wherever you are or go in your world. This week, looking at our legacies of all kinds, ones bequeathed, handed or passed down to us, from the cultural to the ancestral, from the natural to the emotional. And at what legacies we're creating right now, not just for later, but in our days, yes, our living, breathing legacies, what we're modeling as beings, what we're inspiring, and yes, what ones too we will leave behind, ideally for the good, you individually, and those we collectively, as a society, are making and will pass on, especially the condition we leave the earth in, leave our natural environment in, for the next generations. Inheritances that, to me, are far more vital and valuable than the purely material, the financial, the territorial. So, I've chosen a freshly curated stream of cultural commentary, poetry, inquiry, and discovery for us to enter together for a while, that I hope you find interesting and enlivening. Let's flow in with a piece by Naomi Shihab Nye. It's called Famous. The river is famous to the fish. The loud voice is famous to silence, which knew it would inherit the earth before anybody said so. The cat sleeping on the fence is famous to the birds watching him from the birdhouse. The tear is famous, briefly, to the cheek. The idea you carry close to your bosom is famous to your bosom. The boot is famous to the earth, more famous than the dress shoe, which is famous only to floors. The bent photograph is famous to the one who carries it, and not at all famous to the one who is pictured. I want to be famous to shuffling men who smile while crossing streets, sticky children in grocery lines, famous as the one who smiled back. I want to be famous in the way a pulley is famous, or a buttonhole, not because it did anything spectacular, but because it never forgot what it could do. Thank you, Naomi Shihab Nye. Famous, that's from her collection Words Under the Words. Frank Steele's poem, Part of a Legacy. I take pillows outdoors to sun them as my mother did. Keeps bedding fresh, she said. It was April then, too, buttercups fluffing their frail sails, one striped bee humming grudges, a crinkle of jonquils. Weeds reclaimed bare ground. All of these leaked somehow into the pillows, looking odd where they simmered all day, the size of hams, out of place on grass. And at night I could feel some part of my mother still with me in the warmth of my face as I dreamed baseball and honeysuckle, sleeping on sunlight. Thank you, Frank Steele. I know a beautiful spirit, a Japanese body worker over in Mystic, Connecticut, Takako Dart. And the very first time I met her and heard some of her early life story growing up by a temple in Japan, in Kyoto, this poem emerged out of me, and I gave it to her with honor. It's called Hinoi Uma, Fire Horse. Fire horse woman, wild-hearted woman, temple bell ringer, ritual tea maker, uchigatana, katana wielder, cutting edge up, child of wisdom, of wise men, freckled woman, face speckled with sunlight, firelight, soul light, woman of knowing hands, healing hands, body reaching, reading, restoring hands, flowing mane, free-seeing eyes, free-flying words. Fire horse. That was the sign that she was born under and influenced how she was seen as a girl and then as a woman, and obviously infused all parts of herself. Well, I was shaped in part initially by the Catholicism of my birth family, and I went through many motions, albeit at times ambivalently, unknowingly ambivalently, till I left university and could choose my own way, my own spiritual path and legacy. So this is called An Altered Boy, A-L-T-A-R-E-D. A cassocked and surpliced boy. A censer-lighting boy. A frankincense-wreathed boy serving at prayer-quiet altars by the elbows of solemn priests, pouring cruets of wine and water into chaste gold chalices, ringing low-held bells, listening and prostrating in Latin, later in modern vernacular, local tabernacular, holding reflecting patens under the upright chins of kneeling supplicants, ready or not to receive the Holy of Holies sacraments. Aware of the rituals, the rote ceremonials, but innocently skeptical of the actual spiritual. Amen. An altered boy. By the way, as I'm sharing these things with you, I was thinking of one listener who said, what do you think about offering a sort of resource list or a list of the poems that you share across the program? So let me know if that's of interest to you, and I'll figure out how I might be able to do that. Or you could always email me and ask me, but let me see if I can figure that out for you. But I would like to come, before we go any farther, with questions about legacies, yours, ours. Let's consider these before we continue on. What first comes to mind when you hear the word, quote, legacy, or inheritance, or having something handed down? What about tradition? What do you consider to be a truly important family legacy from your family? Maybe a legacy you cherish, or maybe one of an unwanted kind you've sought to break or change, or have since transformed. How do you feel about your particular cultural or ancestral heritage? What part, if it does, play in your life or psyche? What about the history of your country, whichever one you belong to or are listening in from? And what kind of future would you like to see for it if you could shape it more largely yourself? How do you want to be remembered? By your loved ones? By your community? By others? What imprints have you made or are you making in your life, in your world? Imprints of being, of heart, of spirit, of right living. I believe imprints of people's energies, of their spirits are there, sometimes very, very lastingly, even if we didn't know them, and can in themselves affect us. What lessons learned do you have to pass on, or hope to pass on? And how would you pass them on, other than living them? Maybe writing something to those that follow you on. If you wrote out your best qualities, your most admirable qualities, what would they be? If you thought about those people you've had a deep impact on, who would they be? And what significant effect have others had on you, on your life? Whether one still living or one since departed, or maybe some writer or a figure from history that inspired you immensely, or caused you to alter your way of seeing or believing or moving through the world. Your very presence affects the world around you. It touches other lives, strangers included. Maybe far more than you realize or can ever see or know. How do you feel about that idea? What if you looked at yourself and everyone else you meet or talk with each day as an heirloom of some kind? How might that alter the way we treat each other? And if there could be only one, what's the single greatest gift you feel any person could pass on to the next generation? Oh, things to ponder. Me too. Well, historical legacies, for good or ill, are something to ponder. On the latter side, the colonial empires like the British, and our own tarnished legacy of slavery and our treatment of the Native Americans. Here's Derek Walcott's poem, Lost Empire. There's a poet from the Commonwealth. I've forgotten what island. British island, I think Trinidad, perhaps. Lost Empire. I'm just going to read part one of this. And then there was no more empire all of a sudden. Its victories were air, its dominions dirt. Burma, Canada, Egypt, Africa, India, the Sudan. The map that had escaped its stain on a schoolboy's shirt like red ink on a blotter. Battles, long sieges. Dhows and feluccas, hill stations, outposts, flags fluttering down in the dusk. Their golden ages went out with the sun, the last gleam on a great crag, with tiger-eyed turbaned Sikhs, pennons of the Raj to a sobbing bugle. I see it all come about again. The tasseled cortege, the clop of the tossing team with funeral pom-poms, the sergeant major's shout, the stamp of boots, then the volley. There is no greater theme than this chasm-deep surrendering of power, the whited eyes and robes of surrendering hordes, red tunics and the great names, Sindh, Turkestan, Cawnpore, dust dervishes, and the Saharan silence afterwards. Thank you, Derek Walcott. Yes, I was thinking of the sad and shameful legacies of different countries and their people may have never really come to terms with, owned up with on a top level, or maybe their peoples never really embodied what that was like for those oppressed ones. This is from thewell.com, Native American Heritage, Revising an American Legacy. The term indigenous people is used throughout this article to refer to people who existed in the Western Hemisphere prior to 1492, so Native Americans to what became the United States. November, this month, marks Native American Heritage Month, the month when America celebrates the history and legacy of the Native people, or they call themselves the First Peoples, I believe. These communities have names, stories, and struggles that, when highlighted and celebrated, allow those honoring to redefine and perhaps redeem humanity. As a part of this celebration, it's important to bring awareness to the experiences and injustices that continue to impact Native American people, particularly to highlight their resistance to the ongoing threats to their land, water, and people. Celebrating the ways in which they've resisted domination allows us to better understand their perseverance and what that means to our collective humanity. And that begins by first unraveling the myth of Christopher Columbus discovering America. He never set foot on what became the United States, but his voyage to the Americas created a genocidal legacy that devalued humanity through acts that decimated entire civilizations of indigenous people. Perpetuating the myth of discovery through celebration also perpetuates the devaluation and invisibility that define the contemporary experiences of Native Americans. So taking the time, they say, to address the historical fallacy of discovery allows us to better understand their survival and to celebrate one of our nation's greatest treasures, resistance. As the nation comes together to celebrate this month, it is important to participate in that legacy. It's an action that taps into a human tradition of righting the wrongs of our past to build a better future. And why, my friends, would we not want that? I certainly do, and I have a feeling everyone listening does. The Native American poet Joy Harjo wrote this, An American Sunrise. We were running out of breath as we ran out to meet ourselves. We were surfacing the edge of our ancestors' fights and ready to strike. It was difficult to lose days in the Indian bar if you were straight. Easy if you played pool and drank to remember to forget. We made plans to be professional, and did, and some of us could sing, so we drummed a firelit pathway up to those starry stars. Sin was invented by the Christians, as was the devil, we sang. We were the heathens, but needed to be saved from them. Thin chance. We knew we were all related in this story. A little gin will clarify the dark and make us all feel like dancing. We had something to do with the origins of blues and jazz. I argued with a Pueblo as I filled the jukebox with dimes in June, 40 years later, and we still want justice. We are still America. We know the rumors of our demise. We spit them out. They die soon. Thank you, Joy Harjo. Denise Lowe, L-O-W, walking with my Delaware grandfather. Walking home, I feel a presence following and realize he is always there, that native man with coal black hair who was my grandfather. In my first memories, he is present, mostly wordless, resident in the house where I was born. My mother shows him the cleft in my chin, identical to his. I am swaddled and blinking in the kitchen light, so we are introduced. We never part. Sometimes I forget he lodges in my house still, the bone house where my heart beats. I carry his mother's framework, a sturdy structure. I learn his birthright. I hear his mother's teachings through what my mother said of her. She kept a pot of stew on the stove all day for anyone to eat. She never went to church but said you could be a good person anyway. She fed hobos during the 30s, her back porch a regular stopover. Every person has rights, no matter what color. Be respectful. This son of hers, my grandfather, still walks the streets with me. Some twist of blood and heat still spark across the time bridge. Here, listen. Air draws through these lungs made from his. His blood still pulses through this hand. Walking with my Delaware grandfather. Thank you, Denise Lowe, for that. From the Center for Action and Contemplation, Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R. He has some daily meditations, and this was an interesting piece that I had came upon back in March, from Wisdom Beyond the Veil. And It's actually referencing or quoting Barbara Holmes, whose book is called Liberation and the Cosmos, Conversations with the Elders. I know that African foremothers and forefathers would have referred to the assembled leaders as ancestors, and that the place would be understood to be, quote, beyond the veil. Although some folks use a very narrow definition of the word ancestor, I use it as an indicator of legacy and interconnections. The ancestors are elders who pour their lives into the community as a libation of love and commitment. They live and die well, and when they transition, they do so in full connection with an engaged community. Thereafter, they dwell in the spaces carved out by our spiritual and cultural expectations. They may be in another life dimension, but they connect with us in dreams, in memories, and in stories. And there's more on that, but I will save that for another time just to keep us going along. There's a very beautiful poem I'm going to point you to. Again, I'm still editing a little as we go for time, so I don't want to run over too much or at all. So much wonderful material for us, but you might want to look up The Last Slave by Marilyn Nelson, and she dedicates it to Samuel Freeman, emancipated November 8, 1820. And it's quite beautiful, so I'm mentioning it to you. From culturalfront.org on Malcolm Gladwell's interesting book, Outliers. I don't know if anyone's read it out there, but you might have, but I just want to call your attention to, in Chapter 6, he highlights, in their words, cultural legacies. He opens with disturbing descriptions of how long-standing cultural patterns and beliefs influenced violent conflicts among generations of families in Kentucky during the 19th century. The compelling research findings concerning long-term and deeply held values led him to the conclusion that cultural legacies are powerful forces. They have deep roots and long lives. They persist generation after generation, virtually intact, even as the economic and social demographic conditions that spawn them have vanished. And they play a role in directing attitudes and behavior that we cannot make sense of our world without them. He goes on to note the possibilities of, quote, taking cultural legacies seriously in order to learn, quote, why people succeed and how to make people better. It's a very interesting book, too, in its larger way. Outliers. Well, I'm wondering, as we go, and before the show, I was thinking, are we, some of us, choosing our own way, making our own clear and unique legacy now and for the future, or letting it be chosen for us? Because it will be chosen. If you don't choose it, something or someone else will choose it for you. And this poem I wrote a few years ago applies not just to men, but to women too. But I'm using man here, even though it relates to everyone. This is called The Encapsulated Man. Flies through space and time, contained by the culture. Content or not, he stays in his suit and well-constructed shell as he rockets instead of pilots through life, guided not by his own volition, let alone intuition, but by a distant mission control that's mindful of its own needs, heedless of his. He, throughout, rarely, barely, or none the wiser. Let us not be encapsulated men or women, and if you are, bust out. It's time. Via the marginalia on nature's legacy, ancestor worship with Mother Nature, and how indigenous death rituals illuminate the web of life. This is from David Abram's book, The Spell of the Sensuous. Superb book. I've actually spoken it for different reasons in one or two other shows past. Well, he says in here, for almost all oral cultures, the body's decomposition into soil, worms, and dust can only signify the gradual reintegration of one's ancestors and elders into the living landscape from which all too are born. Isn't that a beautiful, beautiful thought? He says, ancestor worship in its myriad forms, then, is ultimately another mode of attentiveness to non-human nature, It signifies not so much an awe or reverence of human powers, but rather a reverence for those forms that awareness takes when it is not in human form, when the familiar human embodiment dies and decays to become part of the encompassing cosmos. Thank you, David Abrams, for that. Well, friends, let's look at and ideally appreciate the innocent, recurring legacy of the gifts of nature, like the seasons, and all the returning feelings and anticipations we have of them from their beginnings to their endings. This I composed in September here in Rhode Island, this very year. Singing Summer's Swan Song. It's a lilting song. It's a gilded song. It's a song that's sung in many tongues every summer's end, from New England to Switzerland. You sing it gladly, gratefully, in a feather-soft voice, for all the fruits of light, warmth, ease, another summer gave you. And you go on singing till the sun sets ever so lightly on it, on your face, on the sea, on the sand, on the blue heroned salt ponds, into autumn. So I spoke of David Abrams a moment ago in Mother Nature, and I think of the legacy of the purely natural world and all it has given humankind from the start and still gives so freely, but also what it has endured and is enduring in our time. Like the rainforest or the sequoias, the environment in so many different ways, shapes, forms, oceans, put upon. But I was out one day in an old estate, the old Dodge estate in Madison, New Jersey, one September, and a few years back. And I was beholding the very, very old trees that had been planted there. And this poem came to me. This is for the grandfather trees. They wear their scars. They wear their scars with dignified bearing. Their once fierce, now faded slashes and gouges, breaks and heavy blows, like medals of valor. From their battles with the ravages, savagings of unkind times, indifferent elements, still standing, all greenly and gallantly, stout-heartedly, in the old low-cut meadow, under bountiful white clouds and constable blue skies, on this soft and most peaceable mid-September afternoon. Inheritance by Edith Dorothea Morell. Some people I have known to be as firm as any tree, as strictly bound by duty as a tree is that faithfully bears its fruit. I have known some people to be like a tree, and their young to be as drifting leaves. Inheritance. Thank you, Edith Morell. From Focus on the Family. On family legacies, why should we care? Just a few notes from this. If we don't intentionally pass on a legacy consistent with our beliefs and values, our culture will pass along its own. No matter who we are, where we live, and what our goals may be, we all have one thing in common, a heritage. That is, a social, emotional, and spiritual legacy passed on from parent to child. Every one of us has passed family legacies. Also, we live out a family legacy, then we give a family legacy to our family. It's not an option. Parents always pass one to their children. Passing on a positive, affirming one is so important, and a negative one, of course, can be so destructive. So it's an interesting piece that goes into the specifics of the emotional, social, spiritual legacies and some good thoughts about them. Well, speaking of parents, and not least mothers, and what they have given us, give us now, and leave us consciously, osmotically, and otherwise. The mother tongue. The one we heard, learned in utero. From the first one that used it to speak to us, shape vowels for us. tell stories that glowed, sang lullabies that soothed. As we tuned our ears, began to tune ourself, our near-born, newborn self, new-made senses to the world around us, and fountain forth words of wonder, of sorrow, of tenderness, and gladness alike, in the shared language of our shared nature, our dear mother tongue. There was a book from 1997 called The Gender Knot, K-N-O-T, Unraveling Our Patriarchal Legacy. When we speak of legacies, I think this is one of the most important ones to understand, see, and change. It's by Alan G. Johnson. Might be of interest to you to read. I'm just going to give you a little bit of the publisher's summary on it. The publisher was Temple University Press. We are all living deep inside an oppressive gender legacy called patriarchy. On some level, most people know that gender is tied to a great deal of suffering and injustice, from inequality in the workplace to violence and sexual harassment to the conflict between work and family roles. Millions of women are weary from the struggle simply to hang on to what's been gained, and many well-intentioned men do nothing because they can't see how to acknowledge what's going on without inviting guilt and blame simply for being men. The result is a knotted tangle of fear, anger, blame, defensiveness, guilt, pain, denial, ambivalence, and confusion. The more we pull at it, the tighter it gets. Unraveling the knot begins with getting clear about what patriarchy really is, about what it's got to do with each of us, and about how both men and women can see themselves as part of the process of change towards something better. It's based on more than 20 years of work on gender issues. The Gender Knot. That actually made me think of a poem from the east side of New York City, which, if you're familiar with it, it has a very particular character. I lived on the west side of New York. I could never be an east sider, but it was interesting to observe them, a certain sect of people who live over there. Not all of them, of course, but you might understand. A certain waspy set. So I put my lens on a set of those people over there back in November of 2016. So it's 6 years ago, or rather 2018. The chiseled men. Their features chiseled by generations of Puritan ways, white Anglo-Saxon ways, the ways and weather of the hive, of their Rushmored tribe, of buttoned-up, buttoned-down business, manners, living, and emoting, rye and dry cocktailing aside, who border on parched and pinched, the etched men and their often pursed and whittled wives, and maybe their chipped off the old block offspring, who faithfully, consciously and unconsciously follow their classified code, their urbane creed, their eyes-closed rituals of mating and relating, who hew through lives of long familiar, particular, and frequently non sequitur motions no one upper east of the west side would even blink at or ever think to question. The chiseled men. Well, I came across this poem as an example of living legacies and ones that touch and inspire us in the present, and also the great power of women. Speaking about patriarchy, I think we could do with a lot more matriarchy, or at least a restoration of equalness, of feminine energy globally, and what that would enable. So Moja Kaf, K-A-H-F, has this poem, The Marvelous Women. All women speak two languages, the language of men and the language of silent suffering. Some women speak a third, the language of queens. They are marvelous, and they are my friends. My friends give me poetry. If it were not for them, I'd be a seamstress out of work. They send me their dresses, and I sew together poems, enormous sails for ocean journeys. My marvelous friends, these women who are elegant and fix engines, who teach gynecology and literacy, and work in jails and sing and sculpt and paint the 99 names, who keep each other's secrets and pass on each other's spirits like small packets of leavening. It is from you I fashion poetry. I scoop up in handfuls, glittering sequins that fall from your bodies as you fall in love, marry, divorce, get custody, get cats, enter supreme courts of justice, argue with God. You rescuers on galloping steeds of the weak and the wounded, creatures of beauty and passion, powerful workers in love, you are the poems. I am only your stenographer. I am the hungry transcriber of the conjuring recipes you hoard in the chests of your great-grandmothers. My marvelous friends, the women of brilliance in my life, who levitate my daughters, you are a coat of many colors and silk tie-dye so gossamer it can be crumpled in one hand. You howleries, you mermaids, swimmers in dangerous waters, defiers of sharks. My marvelous friends, thirsty Hagars and laughing Sarahs, you eloquent radio Aishas, Marys drinking the secret milkshakes of heaven, slinky Zuleikas of desire, gay Waladas, Harriets parting the sea, Esthers in the palace, Penelopes of patient scheming. You are the last hope of the shrinking women. You are the last hand to the fallen knights. You are the only epics left in the world. Come with me, come with poetry, jump on this wild chariot. Hurry! Wonderful. The marvelous women. Thank you, Mojakaf. Well, there's another book I want to mention, might interest you. It's called Emotional Inheritance, A Therapist, Her Patients, and the Legacy of Trauma by Galit Atlas. And this is from a review on that book from Goodreads. Award-winning psychoanalyst Dr. Galit Atlas draws on her patients' stories and her own life experiences to shed light on how generational trauma affects our lives. Intimate, textured, compassionate, said by John Kabat-Zinn, author of The Healing Power of Mindfulness. In this transformative book, she entwines the stories of her patients, hers, and decades of research to help us identify the links between our life struggles and the, quote, emotional inheritance we all carry. For it is only by following the traces those ghosts leave that we can truly change our destiny. Emotional inheritance. Speaking of that, there's a poem, and I will pass on, but I'll tell you about it. It's called Inheritance by Tyree, T-Y-R-E-E, Day, D-A-Y-E. You could find that actually at poetryfoundation.org, apropos of our theme. Ray Bradbury said, "Everyone must leave something behind when he dies." My grandfather said, "A child or a book or a painting or a house or a wall built on a pair or a pair of shoes made. It doesn't matter what you do," he said, "so long as you change something from the way it was before you touched it into something that's like you after you take your hands away." I also came across something intriguing. How about this? The American Future Gap. It's from the Institute for the Future, a new national survey conducted by this group about how often people typically think about the future. Well, it turns out a majority of Americans report that they rarely or never think about the far future. What are the implications for this foresight gap for society and our individual well-being? Let's ponder that. That's a bit shocking. More than a bit shocking. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "To leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition, to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived, that is to have succeeded." The great anthropologist Margaret Mead never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Well, here's someone who imagined something entirely different about changing the world. She imagined history differently, or it could be different. And if imagine that, I think, with her, if our history going forward could be one of a golden age ahead where suffering was conspicuously absent. This is A History Without Suffering by E.A. Markham. In this poem, there is no suffering. It spans hundreds of years and records no deaths, connecting when it can those moments where people are healthy and happy, content to be alive. A chapter, maybe a volume, shorn of violence, consists of an adult reading aimlessly. This line is the length of a full life, smuggled in while no one was plotting against a neighbor except in jest. Then, after a gap, comes Nellie. She is in a drought-fisted field with a hoe. This is her 12th year on the land, and today her back doesn't hurt. Catechisms of self-pity and of murder have declared a day's truce in the civil war within her. So today we can bring Nellie, content with herself, with the world, into our history for a day. In the next generation we find a suitable subject camping near a border of a divided country. For a while no one knows how near. For these few lines she is ours. But how about the lovers, you ask, the freshly washed body close to yours, sounds, smells, tastes, anticipation of the young, the edited memory of the rest of us? How about thoughts higher than their thinkers? Yes, give them half a line and a mass of footnotes. They have their own privileged history, like inherited income beside our husbandry. We bring our history up to date in a city like London. Someone's just paid the mortgage, is free of guilt, and not dying of cancer, and going past the newsstand doesn't see a headline advertising torture. This is all recommended reading, but in small doses. It shows you can avoid suffering if you try. Thank you, E.A. Markham. Michael Meade has a series. Actually, it was happening on the 27th of October, and it actually will be the other part will be happening on the 3rd. I think it's free, if you want it to be free. It's Heart and Soul, Living Wholeheartedly in a Troubled World. And he's the applied mythologist, M-E-A-D-E, Michael Meade. But in speaking about that offering, he said, "It is our mutual fate to find ourselves in a divided world, facing uncharted territories. The maps we were given no longer describe the terrains of both nature and culture. Yet our collective inheritance includes a heart that is a vital organ, but also a great inner territory as wide as the heavens, as deep as the earth. Like the earth, the human heart bears an inner flame that can burn with intense passions and deep longings, but can also illuminate paths of compassion, healing, and renewal. The wisdom of the heart includes the well of great memory that connects the ancient knowledge with future potentials. Thus, changing fate requires a greater way of seeing, a deeper way of being, a genuine change of heart that transforms life from within. Each heart can be mine for courage, and each soul is imbued with creative imagination. Yet often we must be driven to inner resources by fear, grief, and despair. Our greatest obstacles and sufferings aim at a revelation of the heart within our heart. For what the heart loves is the cure, and what cures the human heart can help heal a broken world." Thank you, Michael Meade. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, author of Women Who Run with the Wolves, that you might know, among other books of note of hers, on recognizing greatness of soul. Speaking of soul, in myths and fairy tales, deities and other great spirits test the hearts of humans by showing up in various forms that disguise their divinity. They show up in robes, rags, silver sashes, or with muddy feet. They show up with skin like old wood, or in scales made of rose petal, or as a frail child, as a lime-yellow old woman, as a man who cannot speak, or as an animal who can. The great powers are testing to see if humans have yet learned to recognize the greatness of soul in all its varying forms. Yes. Gregory Orr has an untitled poem. This is what was bequeathed us. This earth the beloved left, and, leaving, left to us. No other world but this one. Willows and the river and the factory with its black smokestacks. No other shore, only this bank on which the living gather. No meaning but what we find here. No purpose but what we make. That and the beloved's clear instructions. Turn me into song, sing me awake. Thank you, Gregory Orr. Mahatma Gandhi said, in a gentle way, you can shake the world. And the poet Mary Oliver said, I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. And C.S. Lewis said, never in peace or war commit your virtue or your happiness to the future. The present is the only time in which any duty can be done or any grace received. There's a very, I think, rather powerful, quietly powerful poem, and a poem and poet new to me, Brian Comey Dempster. It's called Origin. Maybe strangely timely, as the world, by all accounts, stands on the brink, 80 years later, of intentional nuclear action and destruction. So there's some other things I want to share, so I'm going to just put that aside, and if we can, we'll read it, but I'm going to tell you just to look it up if you like, Origin, and poetryfoundation.org. You can definitely find it there. It's one of my good sources. But Ada Limon has this, also timely, I would say, a place of pause and witness and contemplation about what we want for our given countries as people and what we don't want. And she speaks here on America's national anthem. She says it's called a new national anthem. The truth is, I've never cared for the national anthem. If you think about it, it's not a good song. Too high for most of us with, quote, the rocket's red glare, and then there are the bombs. Always there is war and bombs. Once I sang it at homecoming and threw even the tenacious high school band off key. But the song didn't mean anything, just a call to the field, something to get through before the pummeling of youth. And what of the stanzas we never sing? The third that mentions, quote, no refuge could save the hireling and the slave. Perhaps the truth is, every song of this country has an unsung third stanza, something brutal snaking underneath us as we blindly sing the high notes with a beer sloshing in the stands, hoping our team wins. Don't get me wrong, I do like the flag, how it undulates in the wind like water, elemental, and best when it's humbled, brought to its knees, clung to by someone who has lost everything. When it's not a weapon, when it flickers, when it folds up so perfectly you can keep it until it's needed, until you can love it again, until the song in your mouth feels like sustenance, a song where the notes are sung by even the ageless woods, the short grass plains, the red river gorge, the fistful of land left unpoisoned. That song, that's our birthright, that's sung in silence when it's too hard to go on, that sounds like someone's rough fingers weaving into another's, that sounds like a match being lit in an endless cave, the song that says, my bones are your bones, and your bones are my bones. And isn't that enough? Thank you. Ada Limon, a new national anthem. One more by Joy Harjo for us. Memory Sack. That first cry opens the earth door. We join the ancestor road. With our pack of memories slung slack on our backs, we venture into the circle of destruction, which is the circle of creation, and make more. Thank you, Joy Harjo. A much farther back poem, Percy Bysshe Shelley's poem, Ozymandias. I remember this as a boy. It always stuck with me, and I thought about it as I was preparing things for us, and thinking about the delusions of grandeur of past rulers and the arrogance of them, like the divine right of kings. And Ozymandias came to mind how his legacy turned very far from the high and mighty. And we might say, verbum sapientisat in Latin, which means a word to the wise, is sufficient. Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, have sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. The lone and level sands stretch far away. Ozymandias. And now to our last handful of sharings and musings for the time being. Michael Ray from the book The Highest Goal. The key is to do what works for you so that you begin to develop your own path. You don't reject the people and traditions of your early life. Rather, you begin to develop your own tradition and work with your own teachers. This is a lifelong journey. No matter how old you are, this process of finding what works and discovering your path gives your life meaning. You continually develop your understanding of your relationship to the highest goal, to your highest truths. By creating from your highest goal and living on your path toward it, you inspire others, and this becomes your greatest legacy. From one of David White's 3 Sundays series that I've been following. This was back in the spring. The edge you carry with you. Becoming visible while carrying what is hidden as a gift to others. It's the subtitle of that. And in there, in his invitation, he says, our wounds and traumas are not just a difficult personal inheritance, nor are they meant to be completely, quote, healed or forgotten. Our physical sense of having been hurt is not only our true foundation of compassion for others and the pain they carry, but the actual doorway through which we may fully appear in the world again, a doorway through which we might give our creative gifts against all the odds, a portal through which we will manifest our ideas in good work that takes others into consideration, and also, importantly, a pathway by which our own difficulties enable us to change our society for the better. Well, here's one of mine. Let's continue the evolution, the revolution, and recognition from Homo habilis, able man, to Homo erectus, standing man, to Homo sapiens, knowing man, to truer, maybe sooner, inner glowing, outer flowing, homini animas, soul being. Ursula Le Guin, Techniques. Can you keep your soul in its body, hold fast to the one, and so learn to be whole? Can you center your energy, be soft, tender, and so learn to be a baby? Can you keep the deep water still and clear so it reflects without blurring? Can you love people and run things and do so by not doing? Opening, closing the gate of heaven, can you be like a bird with her nestlings? Piercing bright through the cosmos, can you know by not knowing? To give birth, to nourish, to bear and not to own, to act and not lay claim, to lead and not to rule. This is mysterious power. Thank you, Ursula Le Guin. Donald Justice. There is a gold light in certain old paintings. There is a gold light in certain old paintings that represents a diffusion of sunlight. It is like happiness. When we are happy, it comes from everywhere and from nowhere at once, this light, and the poor soldiers sprawled at the foot of the cross share in its charity equally with the cross. Orpheus hesitated beside the Black River. With so much to look forward to, he looked back. We think he sang then, but the song is lost. At least he had seen once more the beloved back. I say the song went this way. Oh, prolong now this sorrow, if that is all there is to prolong. The world is very dusty, uncle. Let us work. One day the sickness shall pass from the earth for good. The orchard will bloom. Someone will play the guitar. Our work will be seen as strong and clean and good. And all that we suffered through having existed shall be forgotten as though it had never existed. Thank you, Donald Justice. And here's Linda Hogan, The Sandhills. The language of cranes, we once were told, is the wind. The wind is their method, their current, the translated story of life they write across the sky. Millions of years they have blown here on ancestral longing, their wings of wide arrival, necks long, legs stretched out above strands of earth where they arrive with the shine of water, stories, interminable language of exchanges descended from the sky, and then they stand, earth made only of crane, from bank to bank of the river, as far as you can see, the ancient story made new. Thank you, Linda Hogan. That's from Sing, Poetry from the Indigenous Americas. And last for now, and for this season of autumn, and for beautiful, soulful traditions and rituals, here, the Celtic celebration of All Hallows Eve. Samhain, the end of harvest time, when Celts led their cattle down from their summer pastures, when sacred bonfires were set immensely alight beneath the also burning stars to cleanse and protect. A liminal time to cross easily to the other world and make way for the spirits, the fairies, the Aosi, to enter this one, bring their good fortune to farmers and crops, livestock and lovers, and receive in return grateful offerings of food and drink. A hallowed time when departed souls revisited their earthly homes, seeking comfort. Long gone kin were beckoned and welcomed to places set for them at tables of the living, whose faces glowed in soft pools of waxing candlelight. When mumming and guising surprised the openers of neighboring doors, and people in costume or full disguise recited verses to the ready lookers and listeners, and left rewarded with bits of sweet and other treats. And many played games with apples and hazelnuts in the first frosted autumn air. And all marked the turn towards solstice and winter, found solace in their deep-rooted symbols, their comforting rituals, embraced the arriving dark half of the year and their spoken and silent passages through these realms of myth and mystery. Thank you again for leaning in, listening and feeling in, for sharing links to the broadcast replays with friends and others, and from time to time sending along gifts of appreciation to me for one or more or all these free-to-all programs, these labors of true love, my gifts to help nourish and uplift seeking hearts, minds, and spirits. I do welcome your thoughts and suggestions, including for future themes you'd like me to cover, or revelations you've had and would like to share from any program to date, maybe tonight. My email is colin@thepoetorialist.com. Let me know your experience of this show. How did it feel? And did it touch or enliven you? If you are sending a contribution, you can use Venmo to Fivefold, FIVEFOLD at pipeline.com, or PayPal, or regular mail to P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island 02891, or also through my site, thepoetorialist.com, and the Donate tab. As some of you know, patrons can host or sponsor me as a working poet in residence. Email me to explore that. Meanwhile, you can hear all the broadcasts online on YouTube on the Floating Poetry playlist. I hope you'll lean in soon again. Until then, dear listeners, may you handle wisely the varied legacies you've received or may receive, and be greatly conscious of the legacies you're creating or can create in your days that serve in truly meaningful ways to benefit the lives and futures of your family, your community, your friends, your descendants, and others. And may we, as a society, as a world, as a humanity, come together, work in harmony together to create a far more peaceful and beautiful and healthy legacy in the here and now, and for the time and life of the world beyond our time. everything is possible. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.